Hello, my name is Valeria Mikhailova. I'm a women's transformation coach, and today I want to talk to you about the paradoxes of our brain. Look, each of us was born with this amazing construction on our shoulders, but none of us received instructions on how to use it. And today I want to compare the brain to, oddly enough, a Touareg automobile. I'll explain this in a moment. Many years ago, the main car in our family was a Volkswagen Touareg. This car drove perfectly on the highway, in the city, and in principle. Since it is an parquet car, no one had any special expectations about it. And then one day, the Moscow representative office of Volkswagen came to Tumen to organize the Touareg experience. No one really understood what this event would be, but everyone was extremely curious. I was one of those who was also curious, because we drive a Volkswagen, and in general, why not attend a social event? The social party, as it turned out, will be held in the forest on some field, where these Moscow guys came, dug ditches, filled them with water, poured some mountains, put some metal construction, similar to children's swings. Okay, we arrived. The crowd was dark, journalists, television. It became even more interesting. Next, we were invited to test drive this car. Well, what's there to test it for? I've been driving it for several years. Well, if we came, let's test it. So I get into this car together with another group of guys, also curious, obviously. And this very experience begins. I regretted the fact that I agreed to this whole thing about the third minute, when I saw that we were driving this car up to a huge ditch with water. I kind of saw that there was a moat, but I didn't mean that we were going to plunge into it with the car. And I want to tell you, it is not the most pleasant feeling when you sit in the car and behind the side of the car there is water practically up to your knees. It's not the most pleasant. And you can't get out, can you? And it's not very nice to stay inside either. You know, what was my surprise when the person who was sitting behind the wheel, a specialist, started to press some buttons and the car went up, down, tilted, some unknown system turned on. As a person who drives a Touareg, I did not even realize that this car could move like this. It gets worse. We started to climb up the hill. I felt that this mountain was, by God, at a 90-degree angle. Of course, it wasn't 90 degrees, but believe me, that's how I viewed the situation at that moment. And again, what was my surprise when we climbed up and down this mountain, very calmly. When we were coming down, it was so muddy that only God knows how you can drive an SUV, and here was a parquet car. And then again, this man started to turn on some special modes. And we quietly, almost on foot, through this mud, literally stepping over it, so we descended. The last test was that swing. When the car drives on this metal plate, reaches the middle, the plate turns over, and the car drives off. I was close to having a myocardial infarction. In fact, after everything we experienced in this Touareg experience, I looked at this car from a completely different angle. To me, it was no longer a parquet car. It was a very real SUV. Why, in fact, did Volkswagen set up a test like this? Not so much for cars, shall we say, but for people. You know, that thick manual they give to car buyers. As long as I've had new cars, I've never opened it. I thought I knew everything. You know where the main instruments are, you look in the mirrors, and in fact, after 20 years of driving, what is there to learn? The company was aimed at making people study all the features of the car they buy for a lot of money. And, in fact, they don't use their features. By and large, no one does. Back to the brain story. We have no instruction on how to use our own brains. And our lives often happen by inertia. According to scientists, up to 90% of our life, of our activity, happens by inertia, by habits, by some accepted patterns and so on. And we do not go beyond all this. And what happens? What happens is that we are used to driving our Touareg only on a flat surface, and we know how to use our brain in the conditions of this flat road. We have no idea what it can do, much less do we understand how to use it all. Life, in fact, is not always a smooth highway. Life is just these ditches filled with water, swings and mountains. And so, in a case like the Touareg, there's an interaction with our brain. We don't understand what it can do. We are at the level of, unconscious competence, when you don't know what your brain can do. When you live your whole life on habits, on inertia, and you roll on this, asphalt smooth road. But life is not a smooth road. Life is just ditches. It is just mountains. It is just these swings. And if we knew how to control the brain, how that specially trained person skillfully pressed all these buttons, and we got out of these really terrible trials, then we would also come out of some circumstances offered by life less wounded, faster, more efficiently. That is why it is very important to make the brain your ally. Make it so that it would also be interested in getting what we want. Make it so that it, despite the fact that its main task is to save energy, would help us in achieving our grandiose goals. So how do you become the steward of your own brain? How to become someone who knows which gear to turn on and which button to press at a certain moment in order to cope with this or that task, which at first glance seems impossible. The important thing to remember here is that the brain is a dopamine lover. And when we see that completing a certain task will bring our brain dopamine, it becomes much easier for us to perform that task, to get down to it. How do we accomplish this? We take a big task and divide it into smaller tasks. Each step we record is done. Each step is a check mark on the way to the big goal. But that check mark is the dopamine that our brain craves. For example, if you're going to learn Persian as I did, you don't have to present your brain with the honey, you and I should speak Persian story. You know what you're going to hear? You're going to hear, you speak Persian, and I'll go on doing what I'm used to doing. So what did I do in my day? I said to my brain, sweet brain, you and I are literally going to look at this interesting alphabet, which actually looks like just curlicues and some. You and I are going to look at it. You and I are going to memorize 5 letters right now, and we're going to be the woman who knows 5 letters in Persian. It's a small task. It's a manageable task. And once it was accomplished, my brain got its dopamine. More on that. And so when I got to the end of the alphabet and then was able to read syllables, that was a new accomplishment. And my brain got its new dopamine again. And now, when I can put words into sentences and speak, the very fact, the very fixation of success, the feeling of I can, already brings my brain and me great satisfaction. The secret, in fact, is simple. Break any business into small steps, fix the results, rejoice with this result. Thank yourself, admire what you have done. And with such small steps, you can descend from the biggest mountains, or climb them, depending on the task at hand.